Sweeny Murti joining us now here on High Heat to talk about the tenure of Cashman. Nobody has covered the Yankees better than Sweeny. Thanks for being with us. 25 years ago today, Sweeny, General Manager Brian Cashman was announced. What do you remember about that time?
You know, it's funny looking back at that, Alana, you see how scared Brian kind of was. And I think he's talked about that in the past. He didn't want the job. Like the first thing he did, like he wanted to try to change Bob Watson's mind. He didn't want it, but he grew into it. He had a lot to live up to, and he was able to take a team that was ready to win, and he kept them winning. I think that's one of the things I think people kind of shortchange him on a little bit. They say, oh, he just took over the team that had the core and all that. You know, he was able to add to that core and keep them on a winning track for 98, 99, 2000. That had some of his fingerprints on it too, for sure.
100% there, Sweeny. And listen, he got the job partly because of his family's familiarity with Steinbrenner with the horses, because, you know, the Cashman family with the horses and George with the horses, but he earned it. I mean, he was there for a while with Watson, a guy he loved, and anybody who can withstand 25 years, or at least the first 10 of them, with George, win a few titles, deal with managers and Torrey, and stick with this as long as he has with all this 7 years, 100 wins, and all the success he's had, that's a heck of an accomplishment. So he deserves, and anybody who's with 25 years with one team, especially the Yankees, deserves a gold star. I guess that's the bottom line.
You wouldn't know it, Chris, by looking at that video, but he was the guy who, and you've talked to him plenty of times, he would stand up for himself. And that was a big key that Stick Michael had talked about. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. And tell George, you know, maybe something he doesn't want to hear, or just stand up, stick up for your convictions. And he did that along the way. Listen, there are certainly criticisms, as there are with any general manager, any front office. And when you're talking about the last several years, now the Yankees have only won one World Series lately. That was in 2009, not even lately. But you're talking about a guy who's never had a losing season, and shifts in roster, players coming up, players getting older, players getting injured. You're still putting a team on the field that is competing every year. It's not easy to do.
Yeah, he's had winning seasons, made the postseason 21 of his 25 years, and that's something to be said, certainly. And I heard, Sweeny, that at the time of his hiring, Cashman's father, John, said that Whitey Ford had told him that Brian had the best personality to deal with Mr. Steinbrenner, and his dad agreed with him. Do you?
Probably, like I said, like he had those moments, Alana, where, you know, he would fight back and he would yell back. And it's funny. I met, you know, I met Brian's dad when he was around. I met his mom, and like they're quite mild mannered compared to what I feel like Brian does sometimes. And even in dealings with us sometimes, you know, you push him a little bit, he will push back. He has that fire in him, so that when George Steinbrenner would yell at him about something, he wouldn't just sit and take it. He knew when to take it, and he knew when to fight back. And I think, you know, people who were around George Steinbrenner back in all those days would tell you that was a very big key to dealing with him, was knowing how to stand up for yourself and fight back.
The knock on Brian is the drafting and the selection of picks. Now, I know he'll tell you we never have a chance to pick one or two. We're always picking in the late part of the first round, but they haven't really found a lot of starting pitching and developed. And, you know, listen, Judges a while ago. How about the actual, when you think of the Yankee team, Stanton a trade, Donaldson a trade, Torres was a gimme. There was a trade, and they knew, everybody knew how good he was going to be. Rizzo a trade. I mean, that would be the knock on him. He's better with the trades than he is with the drafting. Let me hear your take on that. Go ahead.
I think a lot of times, Chris, you're talking about a team, as we said, they're trying to win every year and they're in the race every year. And a lot of times they kind of have to give a little bit. They don't have time to develop a lot of times. And a lot of times you're seeing young stars come up on teams that maybe aren't winning. You're going to give them a little taste of the big leagues and say, okay, get your feet wet here, start to become who you are, and we'll surround you with winning. The Yankees don't generally have that ability. I mean, that's just one factor. I think there are definitely certainly others in shortcomings, and the people in the organization will agree to that. But there are a lot of things going on, and if you think about what the Yankees farm system does, it still gives them the currency to go get the players they need every year in trades. You know, people want to knock the Yankees farm system, but they're always still able to put a few prospects together to get the trade deadline pieces they need and push themselves forward every year.
How tied in is Aaron Boone to Brian Cashman?
Yeah, I mean, that was Brian Cashman has had the opportunity to choose two managers. He chose one, which is Joe Girardi, and he was with him for 10 years. And, he has been quoted as saying, I hope Aaron Boone is with us for 10 years. They're tied together, and I think it's just understanding how to work together. If that's one of the criticisms about the Yankees is about whether it's Brian Cashman and Hal Steinbrenner or Aaron Boone, how well they work together. I mean, it's also part of what they see as a successful formula. You don't want guys knocking heads. You don't want the manager ignoring what the GM is doing or using players in different ways that maybe they were intended when they were acquired. Every business strives to have guys on the same page. I know it's fun to have some confrontation, but I think that's what Brian Cashman's looking for. And even he says he likes pushback, but you're also still looking for guys who kind of look at things the same way. And I think they made it perfectly clear when they brought Aaron Boone back a few years ago.
Analytics, Sweeny, he's a lot more involved, and the Yankees are a lot more involved in analytics than these all big markets are. But the Yankees love the analytics to a point where you almost get the idea he's giving Boone a lineup every night. How about that? Let me hear.
It is a criticism that they've leaned too far on it. I think the roots in it were probably, if you look at where the Yankees were in the mid to late 2000s, 2005, 2006, 2007, they were getting beaten by teams who were using this, Cleveland, Tampa Bay, and Boston, and they were kind of at the forefront of pushing this forward. And they got to a point where there was a fraction inside the Yankees front office. There was the Tampa group and there was the New York group, and they were almost kind of fighting each other for the credit or the success or whatever it was. And it seemed like Brian finally wanted to wrestle control away, and he did lean heavily into analytics because that's kind of what teams were doing as they were beating the Yankees. So you move forward along that. The criticism has been that they've leaned too heavily into that they have taken away some of the feels, some of the scouting dynamics. They still employ a very big and good scouting staff. Where their input is valued is sometimes depends on who you're talking to. But if you notice very recently, they hired your buddy Brian Sabian. They hired Omar Minaya, guys with scouting backgrounds and can offer maybe a little bit more of that balance. I think that's the way we viewed it when we saw those hires and said they're bringing in guys who kind of shifted back a little bit, although Brian pushed back on a little bit and saying that he does value both sides and that these two signings or additions aren't necessarily indicative of any sort of swing one way or the other.